The wind howled like a wounded wolf across the plains, dragging sheets of snow through the cracks of the lonely cabin. Ethan Cole stirred beneath his rough wool blanket, half dreaming, half freezing, the ache of another winter settling deep into his bones. He'd been living alone for months, just him, his horse Jasper, and the hollow silence that followed every sunrise. The ranch that had once echoed with laughter and the clatter of pans now stood quiet as a grave. His wife Maggie had been gone 2 years. Fever took her fast, and when she died, so did a part of him. The nights had grown long since then, and the cold seemed to press harder against the walls each passing year. He didn't mind dying in this cabin someday. He just didn't expect the reason for his heart to start beating again to sneak under his roof in the middle of a storm. That night, the wind carried more than snow. It carried desperation. A figure moved through the darkness outside, shivering, stumbling, wrapped in a torn deerskin blanket that did little to fight the cold. Naeli's breath came in broken gasps, her lips cracked and pale. She had run for days, hiding from men who hunted her kind like wolves hunt deer. 2 moons ago, her people's camp had been burned to the ground. Those who weren't killed were scattered. She'd been one of the lucky few who escaped. But the luck had run dry fast. Her food was gone, her strength fading. She hadn't seen firelight in days until she saw it, faint, flickering, in the distance. Hope. She followed the light until she stood before the cabin, the smell of wood smoke cutting through the icy air. Her fingers were numb, her body trembling violently. She pushed the door gently, praying it wouldn't creak. The old hinge groaned softly, and she froze. Inside, a man lay sleeping near the dying fire, his face hidden by the brim of his hat. A rifle leaned against the wall beside him. One wrong move, and she'd be shot before she could even beg. But she couldn't turn back. Not now. The cold was already winning. She crept in, her bare feet silent against the wood. Her breath came out in shaky clouds, her eyes darting to the man's chest, rising, falling, steady. His face, though rough and sun-worn, didn't carry the cruelty she'd seen in others. Still, she knew better than to trust a white man. But death was death, and warmth was warmth. She crouched beside the hearth, stretching her hands toward the weak flames, but they gave little comfort. Her fingers felt like ice. Her body shook uncontrollably. She looked toward the bed. The thick blanket there looked like heaven itself. Naeli moved slowly, every heartbeat a drum in her ears. She lifted the edge of the blanket, slipped beneath it, and turned away from him. Her skin touched his arm, and the warmth of his body nearly brought tears to her eyes. She hadn't felt human heat in weeks. The shivering began to ease. Her breathing slowed. For the first time in so long, she drifted into sleep. Ethan didn't notice at first. He was lost in dreams of Maggie, her laughter, her soft hand brushing against his cheek. He murmured her name, turned over, and the warmth against him shifted. His brow furrowed. His hand brushed against something soft, something alive. He woke with a start. It was still dark. Only the faint silver of the moon cut through the shutter gaps. His heart pounded hard as he turned and saw her, dark hair spilling over his arm, her small hand pressed to his chest. For a moment, he thought he was still dreaming. But the air smelled different. Wild, earthy, real. Then he saw the markings on her shoulder, faint but unmistakable, tribal paint. Apache. He jerked back, his breath catching. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. They were dark, deep as the desert night, full of fear. Her lips moved, barely forming words. Please, she whispered, voice cracked and weak. No hurt. Only cold. Ethan froze. Every instinct told him to reach for his revolver, but something in her voice stopped him. Her skin was pale from the cold, her hands trembling violently. She looked more like a ghost than a threat. He rubbed his face, still trying to make sense of it all. You broke in here? He asked, voice rough from sleep. To what? Steal from me? She shook her head frantically. No steal. Just warm. The fear in her eyes was raw. Real. Ethan let out a long, heavy breath. You'll catch your death, he muttered, climbing out of bed and throwing on his coat. Stay where you are. He went to the hearth, grabbed the poker, and stirred the ashes until a few stubborn embers glowed. He added wood, and soon the fire cracked to life. The light revealed her face clearly for the first time, young, maybe 20, with sharp cheekbones and the faint traces of dried tears. Dirt smudged her skin, and her hair was tangled with bits of straw, but she was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. He poured her a tin cup of hot water from the kettle and handed it over. Here, drink slow. She accepted it with shaking hands, whispering something that sounded like thanks. Her voice was so soft it nearly broke him. Ethan sat down on a chair across from her, rubbing his temples. You Apache. She hesitated, then nodded. He swore under his breath. You know what'll happen if the ranchers find you here. They'll hang me right alongside you. I go, she said suddenly, rising to her feet. Her legs buckled, and she stumbled. He caught her by the arm before she fell. Her skin was ice cold. You're not going anywhere, he said gruffly. You'll die out there before you reach the ridge. She looked up at him, eyes wide and pleading. I not want trouble, only live. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tightening. She was trembling from exhaustion, barely standing. He saw Maggie again in that moment, how she'd looked the night before she died, whispering, don't stop being kind, Ethan. The world needs good men. He sighed. You can stay. One night. Tomorrow, you move on. Nayeli nodded slowly, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. She sat near the fire, eyes heavy but alert, as if sleep was a dangerous thing. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching her. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward the window or door, flinching at the sound of the wind. She was a hunted thing, even in rest. The room filled with the quiet crackle of firewood. Ethan found himself studying the lines of her face, the sadness that lived there. He didn't understand why she stirred something inside him, maybe pity, maybe guilt, maybe something deeper. He looked away quickly, ashamed of the thought. Hours passed before her head finally dipped forward, sleep claiming her again. Ethan stood and draped another blanket over her shoulders. He hesitated, his hand lingering for a moment. She looked so small, so fragile, yet he knew she'd survived things most men couldn't imagine. He returned to bed, though he didn't sleep. His mind turned over what he'd just done. If anyone found out, he'd be ruined, called a traitor, maybe even killed. But when he looked toward her again, curled beside the fire like a child, the fear in him faded. All he saw was a human being trying to survive a world that had no mercy left in it. As dawn crept over the hills, the light touched the cabin's windows, painting them gold. Ethan sat up, listening to the faint sound of her breathing. He didn't know what the day would bring, but one thing was already certain. He couldn't just turn her away. Not this woman, not after what he'd seen in her eyes. And though he didn't say it aloud, the decision was already made in his heart. He would keep her safe, no matter what it cost him. The morning after the storm brought a stillness that felt almost unnatural. The air was clear, the snow glinting like crushed glass outside the window, but inside the cabin, warmth lingered from the fire Ethan had kept alive through the night. Nayeli moved quietly, as though afraid her footsteps might shatter the fragile peace. She had borrowed one of his flannel shirts, the sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her long dark hair fell loosely down her back. She looked stronger in the light of day, but her eyes carried the same heavy shadows. Ethan watched her from the table as he sharpened his knife, pretending to focus on the task. She noticed his gaze but said nothing, just kept tidying the small cabin, gathering the bits of wood scattered near the hearth. She moved differently than anyone he'd ever known, careful but certain, like she had learned long ago that silence could mean survival. Every now and then, her eyes flicked toward the door, scanning for danger. Ethan had seen the same look in wounded horses, half ready to bolt at the first sign of harm. You don't have to keep looking over your shoulder, he said finally, his voice breaking the quiet. Ain't no one coming out here this far. Nayeli's fingers stilled on the edge of the table. Always someone coming, she said softly. Always. He didn't argue. She was probably right. The land didn't forgive much, and people forgave even less. He cleared his throat. You hungry? She nodded faintly. He handed her a plate with a few pieces of bread and salted meat. She took it with both hands, whispering a thank you in her language before eating slowly, as if she wasn't sure there'd be another meal. Watching her stirred something deep in Ethan's chest, a strange mix of pity and admiration. She didn't ask for comfort, didn't complain about the cold, didn't even flinch when he spoke too loud. She just kept moving forward, quiet as smoke. After they ate, Ethan saddled Jasper and chopped wood while Nayeli stayed inside, mending a torn blanket. When he returned, she was humming, soft, low, and haunting. The sound stopped him cold. It was beautiful, but there was pain in it too, like she was singing to ghosts. What song is that? He asked gently. Her eyes lifted to his, and for a moment, she hesitated. Song of my people, for the lost. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. The sound of it lingered in the air even after she fell silent, wrapping around his thoughts. As the day faded, Ethan sat near the fire, cleaning his rifle. Nayeli was by the window, watching the horizon where the sun bled into the mountains. She hadn't said much all day, but her expression had grown heavier, her body tense like a bowstring. Finally, she turned to him. You know Fort Briggs? Ethan looked up sharply. Yeah, I know it. My brother there. Her voice trembled slightly. Hunters take him. 2 moons passed. He froze. The bounty hunters. She nodded, eyes glistening. They say, Apache man worth money. They take him north. Maybe dead. Ethan's gut clenched. He'd crossed paths with those men once. Hard, cruel bastards who'd shoot first and brag about it later. You're thinking about going after him? I must. Nayeli, he said slowly, that place is crawling with soldiers and bounty men. You won't get near it. I die if I not try, she said simply. The words hit him harder than he expected. There was no fear in her tone, only truth. Ethan rubbed his jaw, pacing the floor. You don't even have shoes for that kind of journey. I walked before, she replied. Walk again. Her calm defiance stirred something inside him, a mix of anger and respect. She had nothing. No weapons, no allies, no promise of survival, and yet she refused to give up. He envied that kind of strength. That night, long after she fell asleep by the fire, Ethan sat awake, staring at the flames. The memories of Maggie returned, unbidden. Her voice whispered in his head, don't let the world turn you cold, Ethan. Not even when it hurts. He closed his eyes and sighed. Maybe this was the test of that promise. Maybe helping Nayeli was the only decent thing left for him to do. By dawn, the decision was made. When she woke, he was already packing a saddlebag with food and ammunition. We're riding out, he said firmly. Her brow furrowed. Where? Fort Briggs. She froze, disbelief flashing across her face. You help me. He met her gaze. Yeah, someone's gotta. Her lips parted slightly as though she might cry, but instead she nodded once, silently, and went to gather her things, what little she had. They rode out together through the pale morning light, the cold biting their faces, the wind sharp against their skin. The land stretched endlessly before them, harsh and unforgiving. But Ethan noticed how Nayeli's eyes softened every time she looked at it. To her, this wasn't wilderness, it was home. Every ridge, every twisted juniper, every cry of a hawk above carried meaning. They stopped by a stream at midday. Nayeli knelt by the water, washing her hands, murmuring words he couldn't understand. Ethan watched her quietly. You prayin'? She looked over her shoulder, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. Talking to my brother. Maybe he here. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. He didn't know what to say to that. When they reached the outskirts of Fort Briggs, the sky had darkened, clouds rolling in heavy and gray. From a distance, they could see the campfires burning near the old stone walls. Horses were tethered out front, and the sound of men laughing echoed faintly through the wind. Ethan pulled the reins. We can't get too close, he said. They'll spot us before we reach the gate. Nayeli's eyes searched the camp, desperate. Maybe I see him. Ethan handed her his binoculars. Here. She looked through them, her breath quickening. Then she froze. Her hand shook, and she whispered, no. Ethan took the binoculars gently, followed her gaze, and saw what she did. A body hung by the stables, limp, covered by a tattered blanket marked with the paint of her tribe. Her brother. He lowered the binoculars slowly, his heart sinking. He turned to her, but she was already on her knees in the snow, her hands pressed to her face, her body shaking with silent sobs. Ethan knelt beside her, unsure of what to say. No words could fix what she'd just seen. He placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I truly am. She didn't respond for a long time. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears, but there was no anger in her eyes, only sorrow and a strange, quiet strength. He free now, she whispered. Spirits take him home. Ethan swallowed hard. You can't stay here. Those men, they'd do the same to you if they found you. I know, she said softly. I'm ready to go. He helped her onto the horse, and they rode away from the fort as the first flakes of snow began to fall again. Neither spoke for a long while. The world around them was silent except for the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the wind sighing through the canyons. When they finally reached the edge of the valley, Nayeli turned to him. You good man, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head. No, just a man trying to do right. She smiled faintly, a fragile thing that still somehow carried warmth. That is good man. As the cabin came into view through the falling snow, Ethan realized the cold didn't feel quite so bitter anymore. They were both still broken, still haunted, but not alone. That night, she lit the fire while he sat beside her. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. The flames danced between them, casting soft gold light over their faces. When she looked at him, her eyes reflected the firelight and something deeper, a wordless bond forged through loss and mercy. She whispered, "You saved me." Ethan met her gaze, his voice low and steady. "You saved me first." Outside, the storm began again, fierce and wild, but inside the cabin, warmth bloomed. Not just from the fire, but from the fragile, flickering hope that maybe, even in a world as cruel as theirs, two hearts could still find shelter in each other.